Welcome to Cerebral Women in Paris Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. Years ago, after hearing an artist say art will save us, my intellectual curiosity was sparked, and I began a journey to understand exactly how. Through conversations with visual artists and the professionals who support them, I explore how art helps us see our history, our culture, our lives, and the experience of others in ways no other medium can. Capturing these voices is essential. They remind us of the power of art and the importance of noticing life's simple beauty. And now, here in Paris, a city that has long welcomed the daring, the dreamers, and the defiant, I continue these conversations where art breathes, questions, and reminds us that creation itself is an act of liberation. Welcome and enjoy Cerebral Women in Paris. This episode features Kathia St.Hilaire. Born in West Palm Beach, Florida, she now lives and works in New York. Informed by her experience growing up in Caribbean and African American neighborhoods in South Florida, she seeks to memorialize the communities she has been a part of through innovative printmaking techniques. Her work draws inspiration from Haitian Vodun flags, which are used to tell the country's history and honor ancestral spirits. Using non-traditional materials such as beauty products, industrial metal, fabric, or tires, she creates ornate tapestries that seek to preserve the Haitian history and Vodun religion that thrives in Miami. Kathia received her M.F.A. in painting and printmaking at the Yale School of Art and her B.F.A. in printmaking at the Rhode Island School of Design. Her work has recently been featured in solo shows at the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts, Perrotin in New York and Paris, and the NSU Art Museum in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Her group exhibitions include the Speed Museum of Art in Louisville, Kentucky, the Francis Yang Tang Teaching Museum and Art Gallery at Skidmore College, Half Gallery in New York, Blum and Poe in New York, and James Fuentes, New York. Enjoy this episode of Cerebral Women in Paris, featuring Kathia St.Hilaire. Kathia, welcome to Cerebral Women in Paris. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
When did you discover your artistic passion?
I discovered my artistic passion, quite young. My family, I grew up with a lot of artisans. We've always worked a lot with our hands. So when I mean by work a lot, my mom does a lot of textiles and embroidery, and then my dad does a lot of building, and I have a lot of furniture, chair makers. We've always been super enamored just with working with just our hands. So I just feel art has brought me so much comfort through any period of time that I've always had with anxiety.
So with all those influences, do you recall if there was a particular body of work or artist that really influenced you early on?
Early on, I was very much influenced by French Impressionism. I remember I had a lot of catalogs growing up looking at French Impressionism paintings. I've always been a big fan of just the mark making that was done in the colors, but also just growing up in a house where my family worked with a lot of things with their own hands. But at the same time, I've always been super impressed with just the colors I just see in my own neighborhood. So what I mean by that, it's I grew up in such a very so much nature. So closely looking at different plants, leaves, taking colors from that, or even looking at a lot of textiles we would own in my own home. Just keeping that part of me growing up was something that was important.
How do you define your practice?
My practice is experimental. I've always wanted to have a practice where I can mentally test what I can do with materials that I always collect. I would just essentially describe it as an experimental practice that I choose to constantly learn as I go when I make, not to have a sense of certainty of what's going to come out of producing something.
And what materials do you use?
I use like a lot of oil-based inks. Acrylic is something that was like new that I started to use. Since I was little, I've always like loved just like the idea of collecting like things. So whether if they were like skin lightening products or tires or like different types of like ads, saving like just like the byproduct of things that are like completely done and holding on to them and seeing what they would all look like as like multiples together. I work with different metals, but a lot of times while I am collecting, try to find these like, objects that have like a super meaning to me. Those materials will change, but primarily like I work solely like with a lot of like oil-based inks and paper and canvas.
And has your technique changed much over the years?
It's changed a lot. I mean, I started off with studying Japanese prints. Like I was super in love with just like the process and the outcomes and the nuance and how like technical I had to be and precise when it came to like printing those blocks and then having to create prints that were like very like, loose. But then I moved towards like printing with oil. So then printing with oil allowed me to experiment with like different colors, viscosities. Like I just like obsessed with like, ink brands, how to think about inking like a block and how many times I should be passing my like roller, like thinking about the type of paper I would use to print. So essentially like I spent like years just like obsessing over these like minute things to a point where like I'm able to introduce more materials that I was like previously like collecting like for my practice. So then I would like start to introduce different types of like hair packaging into the work and like blending that in. So a lot of times it feels like my practice, at least like from my own perspective, isn't really like stable, but then like I have all these like samples or all these like tiny experiments that I've spent time working on that helps like change my practice over time.
How do you feel your art professors impacted your practice?
My art professors impacted my practice tremendously, especially coming out of undergrad, especially at the Rhode Island School of Design. One of my professors, Daniel Heyman, he taught a class called relief printing, and we had a chance to study Japanese printing as well as just a regular oil-based printing. And that's first sparked my interest in trying to use relief print as like a painting medium. Already like obsessed with like French Impressionism, and I always wanted to be a painter, but I didn't actually want to, go pursue that. And then I also had a professor, Balaji Campbell, who like curated a show at the RISD Museum, and he had it of different beaded sequins, sacred ware from Benin. And then I got enamored with like voodoo flags. And then from that time period on, I think from like 20, maybe 14, 15, I just spent time trying to see how could I like think about the quality of ink, think about how can I take this, the tools I learned in printmaking to incorporate that into like creating my own body of work, even though I wasn't really like making anything to like say anything at that time. I was more so experimenting and just falling in love just with the craft and finding my own like way of making.
Are there thoughts or concepts that connect your work?
I've always knew that I was heavily interested in just like African art, oceanic art. Like I really wanted to see how could I take those like ways of just traditional ways of making and like put that into my own practice, and then also look at current contemporaries and see how I can merge these two together. I wasn't quite sure like how that necessarily would look like, but I knew like growing up, especially as like a Haitian American and not necessarily being like, living in Haiti, but wanting to like take my appreciation for those, like, just like for the arts, like the voodoo flags, and wanting to see how can I like create my own language, knowing that I'm not part of the voodoo religion. So this was like, I don't know, like a sense of like a challenge to where like I was super enamored into like the traditional craft of just like making, but I'm trying to balance those two ideas, the ideas of, this, traditional craft, but then me trying to work within the traditional like craft of the West.
Would you say your life experiences are reflected in your work?
I 100% do agree. I mean, when I first started pursuing this technique and also pursuing a body of work, I wasn't quite sure how to really put my own like self into it. Like I definitely knew that it needed to be more. I wanted it to be more than like me just being like, coming from Haitian descent, but like what does that necessarily like look like? So I spent like a lot of time collecting a lot of just like products that I felt like, represented me and my experience as like a Haitian, just like American, like just like a Haitian American. So it's like one thing I remember us doing a lot of course, is going to like a beauty supply store. So I wasn't necessarily sure like what would it mean. Like I feel like if you spend time like like religiously buying certain products, it means something. It's part of you, and especially if it's like something that's super cultural. I knew that like it was something that I needed to like collect. So like I spent a lot of time, when I did save like all those skin lightening creams or all those braiding hairs, like I knew that like I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it. But if I saved like a whole portion of these items like for like years, I can then eventually go back like once, I refine my technique, I can like incorporate that into a language that makes sense to me. So also looking around the byproduct of areas that I've like grown up in, like I was like super enamored just like with like a plastic bag just blowing in the wind because I just saw it to be like a beautiful representation of just like capitalism and also just like the environment. So like knowing that like, I spent time collecting bags, but I wasn't quite sure like how they're going to relate. But I know that like that image I'm super just like connected to. But it's very interesting when like people who who do go to the beauty supply a lot, they do see like different types of products just like collaged within the work. They're often like, I know that product and I know where you got it from. That's kind of like how I want to make sure I can connect with like how I connect to people who are like coming from like this, a similar experience as I am.
How do you keep learning?
I keep learning by, my whole practice. I go into the studio not necessarily knowing exactly what I'm going to do. So, I mean, I essentially keep learning by looking at other art. I think like, yeah, 2 weeks ago, I spent time like a lot, like the oceanic section of I'm really bad with my French. It's like the Branly Museum in Paris. So looking at like a lot of like past art that was made and constantly thinking like how could I use this for my own inspiration. So and seeing like what exactly like print like how can this be translated into like a printmaking language. So it's constantly looking at other people's of course work, but also like wanting to like figure out ways to challenge myself, like try and introduce like new materials that I've not like yet done before.
What does your workspace look and feel like?
Sometimes it's really clean, and then majority of the time it's like it's very messy and unorganized, depending on what exactly is getting done. So like, I mean, right now, it's very clean because I'm essentially like I shipped out a show, but as usually like when I'm working on another like a new project, my studio gets it gets very very messy to where like sometimes you don't see my like just like my floors. It changes to like how like what exactly I'm working on. So sometimes like if I'm doing installation based work, sometimes my floors are very clean because then I really do need my floors. But other times, like my walls are more important and then I don't have a floor. It goes back and forth. So it's like the vibe of my studio changes, like probably like every 1 to 2 months.
And do you listen to music while you're working?
I mostly listen to like podcasts. I do listen to some music, but I do like of course having, just like some like being able the chance to learn something. So I'm like very into like just like history. Like, this year I had like a big obsession with just like learning about World War I and II and also the Cold War. So just like listening to different historians, but also if there's like a really like a new album that I'm super enamored with, of course I'll be listening to that too.
Share with us, what are you really excited about right now?
This is always a hard question. I mean, I'm super excited for the new body of work that I'm going to be making, and also this time that I get to like, just have a chance to experiment with new techniques that I've been waiting on for a very very long time. Because oftentimes I have to simplify everything that I do to get something out in the world. So having, this like time where I can take like the next few months just to, sit, to experiment, to not have any type of like deadline is always like something that I'm always happy to do or be at.
Do you feel black and brown art can be defined?
Not necessarily. I mean, there's times that I feel like it can be, other times you can't really define that. I mean, I'm saying this, I guess, like as an American myself and being raised, essentially in a predominantly, Caribbean, area. But at the same time, I mean, I take a lot of the art that was introduced to me for my education. I mean, essentially very like Western, but at the same time, it's still, I still learn from it. It still influences me. So I feel like, I always go back and forth with this question, but I always do think it's like culturally where you're at, it's and the community that you're in. But also I do feel like, just art in general, like as artists, you could learn from all art. So, I mean, oftentimes I do find myself, I mean, I spent time looking at Celtic art and I fell in love with just how much Celtic art and African art, the connection of like just like between the two, because I just thought it was just, those two things were just so beautiful and not necessarily like, you don't necessarily, people don't really get to talk about those connections. So it's like, that's a very hard question for me to answer. I kind of can't really give an answer on that. I feel like that changes, day to day. Of course, like anyone knows, like, you're looking at an a work that's made in Vietnam during the time of like the 1920s. But then it's like, okay, someone was like a group of people was probably making something similar to that, like, somewhere in Eastern Europe. So, but I think that's like the most interesting thing about art. It's like we're all like kind of just like interconnected with what we're experiencing, whether if we're not experiencing it like in the same like area.
If you weren't a visual artist, what other career path do you think you would have chosen?
A teacher or pharmacist. I was very into science. I was super into chemistry, and then also was like teaching a little bit before I went off to pursue like my M.F.A. So I feel like those two would have been the major ones I would have pursued.
And what do you enjoy most about your practice?
I just enjoy not knowing like what I'm going to make or how I'm going to put something together. Like it's truly the best thing for me, because I feel like it just allows me to not necessarily worry about like any outside problems I have. I'm just more so interested in like finding a solution and finding a way to make this object that I'm trying to make. I'm not necessarily trying to solve like whether if this is gonna look right or not. I'm more so trying to figure out whether if all these materials I essentially got will hold. So it's essentially allows, that's what I'm always excited about.
So when do you know work is finished, and when within the creative process, when do you decide on the title?
It's almost like a reward system. It's quite weird. I never I never title the work unless like it completely leaves my studio. Like that's like the one, because that's like the only thing I can like look forward to. So I always say like if this is done and it's left, you can title this like at the end. But I never like it when a work is completely, like if a work seems done to me, I never like it because I feel like it's not like something that's living. Like I feel like there's always, if I can't think of something that I can do onto a work, then I feel like it's just not a good work. I'm immediately like uninterested. And it just stays like I have some stuff in my studio where I'm just completely just like uninterested in because I'm just like it has no type of like ability. Like it just looks finished. Like it looks too polished. So like a work for me that will always be acceptable is like a work that looks like it still needs to be worked on. Yeah, no, I usually don't know. Like if it doesn't look finished, if I'm very uncertain if it's going to be finished, then that's when it's like it just needs to be good enough. Like if you're always like so perfect, it's like I don't know, I feel like you can't see yourself in it. It's almost like it gets quite like you just walk into like an IKEA and like you see that chair that everyone has in their home and it's just like it's a chair. It's not the chair that you want forever, but it's the chair that's going to be there for the moment. That's like exactly what I don't like want. You want something that has like character, something that you're always going to work on. I'm quite different when it comes to like when I think something's finished.
So I've enjoyed our conversation. The last question. Let's talk about what do you feel is the purpose of art, and how do you want to impact the way people think?
I feel like the purpose of art, I mean, it's truly to have like a conversation that you're just not able to see in the natural world. So I often think like a lot of times like I mean I think in society we do have like a simplistic way of like looking at life, but the one thing I can always appreciate about art or like whether if it's right, like whether if you're a writer or whether if you're like a musician, they allow you to see things that you just might not appreciate. So I think back to like because last year I spent so much time with like Frank Etienne's work, especially his book Ready to Burst, and I was really obsessed when he mentioned the idea of like a water drop. When he talked in such detail about this water drop and how this can be like used as a metaphor for chaos. I was just super enamored because oftentimes like in my own practice I take for inspiration, just like, simply looking at the sun and that experience of like that white blindness that goes into your eyes. I feel like that's like the emotion that never really I mean, you talk about it, but then there's the experience of it. But I feel like these like small, minute moments that you can like, bring out into the world, I feel like is, so important because it allows us just to like slow down and to know like, our time, like we don't have to always be so fast paced. Like these are like these small gestures are so like they're so beautiful and you don't necessarily have to overcomplicate anything. You could always just like use these simple gestures to make anything, to like even talk about like metaphor stories to relate to one another.
Is that how he impacted you and the current exhibition that you have?
100%. I mean, oftentimes I take inspiration from like books. I mean, a lot of times I run out of, you mentally run out of things to paint or like to things that you would want to, like visually like present. But I think, one thing I like Frank told, like when Frank mentioned the spiral, I knew that like this was going to be very easy, a very easy thing to like make work from because it was just like he had so many like examples. So it's like when I thought about spirals, of course, like I thought about hurricanes, I thought about barbed wire, and then that leads into different types of artists. So it's like I was obsessed with looking at like Jacqueline Humphrey's work and how she uses text in her own work, and how she she has like I think like a whole machine that paints the text for her, or even looking at Jack Whitten's work and how much that relates to time. So it's this was like just like a Pandora's box where I just had so much like inspiration to pull from. And I think Frank really opened my eyes on that, and also how I choose to even look at like history. Frank impacted me so much. He's not well known within in the greater sense, so not much people know about his work in Paris. So knowing that this was his first time actually showing in Paris was very exciting, and knowing that we were able to bring his works, his writing, Ready to Burst, which essentially was published during the Papa Doc dictatorship. It was a time where, you had a lot of academics, the elites leaving Haiti, but he chose to stay for his whole time of living. And, he was determined having his career in Haiti and being one of the founders of spiralism. I just connected to him so much. And, I truly believe that his work will always follow me and always will be part of my work. And I oftentimes don't say that, but I was truly like moved just through his way of just describing what it means to like, just to be a Haitian person living during the time of the Cold War. And essentially everyone is living in an uncertain time. So I was really interested in, how, just one person trying to write a book about a very brutal regime, but it's a regime that, some people look back on and they're fond of because it's a time of stability, but then other people see it as a time of just, it's a time of instability. So knowing that Frank brings this sense of chaos and uncertainty, and something is right, something is wrong, essentially this whole idea of disarray and right is wrong, wrong is right was something that was interested in, pursuing, and will always be, because I feel like that's history. It's never like clear.
It was a beautiful exhibition and very thought-provoking. Thank you. It's been a great interview. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.